Yo, what's up guys? Heart Pirates TCG here. What I have for you today is a video on, I was going to call it resource management, but it actually turned out to be, as I was kind of making this for you guys, it turned out to be more so assigning value to cards. Now, this is something I don't think I've really talked about in length. I've talked more so about resource management, but the easiest way to kind of talk about resource management, or the easiest way to learn about it, is to understand what cards are worth using resources on. And this is a video where I don't know, I guess I kind of explain that in certain ways. It might be kind of confusing, so feel free to watch this video a few times. But yeah, let me go ahead and talk about it. Now, this is page 8. But I wanted to talk about this. Let me actually move my camera a little bit right there. So this is page 8, and I actually figured this is actually going to be the best slide. This should have been the best slide to talk about at first. So this is technically going to be page 1, and then we're going to go up to page 2, or I'm sorry, back to the real page 1. So just to start it off, is every card in this game has a certain value assigned to it. So even if it does not technically get you cards in return, attacking, is damage, which is life, or cards out of hand, or removing the cards is cards out of hand or Don invested. So, every card you play requires some type of commitment from your opponent. So even if it's not technically getting you cards like something like Film Nami would be doing, or even just Nami in general, any searcher, it's still merits some type of value. In certain parts of the game, those same cards can be worth more or less depending on the board state that is showing. Usually cards are worth more the longer the game goes on, right? So that's just simple first page. Let's go ahead and talk about, by the way guys, this is a very long video, so feel free to grab a cup of coffee or whatever it is and just kind of sit back and relax, because this is gonna be pretty long. I think it's a total of 16 pages. So yeah, let's start out with this, right? It's always best to use your life as a resource before turning your character sideways, right? If you're a 5-life leader, I usually take my first 1 or 2 before turning an important character sideways so I can protect it, right? So important characters are characters that are pivotal to your deck strategy, like Nami for Uta. It's a card advantage deck, so your goal is to get cards. She allows you to get cards. These two generate 2 cards per turn. As long as you are not giving up more than that, these are completely worth discarding 2 to 3 cards, depending, per turn to save them. So I know I said these give you 2 cards per turn, and I said sometimes it's worth giving 3 cards to protect them. Why 3? Because it only gives you 2. Because when Nami and Uta turn sideways, not only are they generating 2 cards per turn, but they're also taking 2 cards from your opponent's hand. Depending on how much Dawn's invested, they could even take 4 cards, or obviously do life. So these cards, while they only generate 2 cards per turn, in the term of film characters with the search from Nami and a search from Uta, they not only are getting a +2 to your hand, but they're also getting -2 from your opponent's hand. So technically these are like a 4-card swing, even though one's obviously a leader, but you can just assign the value from the leader because it's so constant to the Nami, right? So like, because the Uta is always basically going to get a card every turn, and if you keep the Nami alive, the Nami's going to get a card every turn. Even though the Nami's only technically generating 1 card per turn, you're still generating 2 cards per turn pretty much for free. So you might as well just allow Nami to be worth that amount, to try to protect it, to keep up the advantage. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. So yeah, just because these cards are only giving you a couple cards per turn doesn't mean that they're only worth that amount. The pressure that they put on your opponent is also huge too, on top of getting rid of cards from their hand. So technically Nami is worth 2 to 3 cards because of her ability to not only generate cards, but to take away cards from your opponent, like I said. So now the math changes a bit with total counter. For example, is Nami worth multiple 2Ks? Well, it depends, right? So I'll kind of go over that, right? So like, if you're on 6 Dawn, right, and your opponent, for whatever reason, or I'm sorry, if you're whatever the situation, let's just say this in a blank space, right? 7-cost Big Mom is attacking into a Nami. That's 4K encounter, right? You have to get to 9K encounter. So that's 2 2Ks, right? So generally that is worth 2 cards, right? That's 2 cards that Nami normally, generates, because obviously these guys are getting 2 cards per turn. And it is okay to save them in this situation, right? Or it is okay to give them more cards in hand for this situation. Some turns, characters may be worth, like I said, more or less cards depending on what the following turns look like. So Nami could be worth more cards on turns where you can protect her more easily in the future. So because she might require 3 cards to protect herself this turn, whether it could be even 3 2Ks, the next turn you might drop Luffy and Uta. She is way easier to protect, so she will make up for the cards that you lost to protect her, right? So for example, if you lose out on 3 cards this turn to protect the Nami, but you can keep it alive for like 3 more turns, then it's obviously generating 3 more cards. So it's a lot easier to protect, even if you are having to block with Uta or block with some other type of blocker, right? Like you're still not only taking cards from their hand, but you're still generating cards with the Nami, and it's an easy chump block. And if they go too high on it, I'm sorry, like if they go 7k at it, you can easily either block with Luffy and discard a 1k, or if they go 9k at it, you can easily block with Uta. So it's so much easier to protect, whereas the value makes up for itself not in that one turn, but in the long run, because the card is actually like not only, like I said before, taking cards from your opponent, but allowing you to get cards, it's also becoming a target for them to attack, and they have to dedicate a lot of Dawn to attack it, and it's very complicated. But these are the things that have to go in, that you keep in mind when you're playing this game is, okay, if I let this live, I might be actually using 3 cards to protect it that are very valuable, but in the future, because my hand looks as the way it does, I can protect it very easily after this. So, and not only am I doing that, but I'm also going to get those cards back in the long run, because they can't kill it unless they're playing like something like, Yamato or, Thunderbolt or something. And that's basically the only way to kill it. So that's a situation where you would protect it with multiple 2Ks, even though sometimes you might not feel like it's that valuable. But in a different scenario where your plan doesn't involve playing something next turn that doesn't protect her, for example, Nami is not worth those cards because she is just going to easily die the next turn, and you wasted multiple cards to protect her, and she's not going to be able to make up for it in the long run. This could be a turn where you don't use Nami's effect, right? So like, let's say you play 10 cost Dofi, for not full value, right? Or just any character, any set of characters that don't involve like protecting this Nami. If they attack an Nami again for 7k, if they have the ability to attack an Nami and you don't have like a blocker or like Punk Gibson or like any type of Dawn, and you have to discard discard even more cards to protect her, then she's no longer as valuable as she might be normally, right? Because not only does the game plan for the next couple turns look like, dropping 10 cost Doflamingo, you're still not using her effect, you're not using your leader effect, so you're just discarding multiple cards to protect her when she's actually not going to be getting the value that she would in certain situations, right? Now, of course, if you're just going to be going very like aggressive into their life with weenie strategies, and getting cards with your leader effect and getting cards with Nami, then of course it's worth saving her because she's generating the value in the long run. But when you're playing these big characters, or when your plans involve using Dawn that doesn't involve using Nami's effect, she's no longer worth like the cards that you're giving her to protect her. So that's just something you have to think of right there, right? And another thing is with countering, right? So we talked about basically value right here. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I kind of threw in countering right here too. Is why counter with a Rebecca for 1k when you're at 3 life, when your Rebecca is technically a blocker and potentially another 2k / card in hand, right? Its value is realistically a +2. It is a blocker and it's an extra card, whatever it is you get from the trash. So countering with it is technically a -1 for card advantage, right? But if you play it, it's actually a +2, right? Sometimes people do this with other cards too. Is, for example, I see people play purple Luffy, and if someone attacks 5k at life, they're like, okay, well, Queen's a 1k counter, I should just discard the Queen rather than the X-Drake right here. However, of course, Queen is a 1k counter, and that's all the attack merits, right? Is a 1k counter to get out of it. But if you're going to be playing that card, it's much better to over counter with a 2k instead of wasting a card that you will want to play just because it's a 1k, right? So people do that with 5 cost Kid, the blocker. They do that with Queen. People do that with Rebecca, with Mon Cherie. They do that with like Brand New, like all these cards that you want to play. In the future, they counter with it because it's a 1k counter. Why would I waste a 2k? But realistically, that 2k is just there to stop an attack, right? Like, as long as it stops an attack, it doesn't have to be a 6k attack. A lot of times these 2ks don't even get out of 6k attacks. They usually just get out of 5k attacks. And that's okay, right? Because now you're just playing these cards that are meant to be played and not just using them as counter, right? For that queen. So let's talk a little bit more about card advantage, right? Is every card, oh, actually, we already talked about this right here. Okay, so let's move on to this version right here. So this Kaido, when you are at full life, when your opponent is at full life, is not nearly as valuable because you can just easily take life the first 2 or 3 hits, and not have to give him any cards at all. So this 10k swing might as well be a 1 million k swing. It doesn't matter if it's attacking into my life and I'm healthy. I'm not getting any cards. He's not getting any cards out of my hand. Obviously, he can attack the board, but this is just an example. If he's just attacking my life, he's not generating a whole lot of value, right? But later in the game, like I said, when cards become more valuable and you're in lethal range, this card is worth a whole lot more because it warrants some type of reaction, whether it's cards in hand, a blocker, or life, right? Everything that you do at the very kind of like the midpoint to the end point of the game, when life starts getting a little bit lower and obviously you're not giving cards away or life away for free, that's when these cards become more valuable because you're able to basically demand a certain response from that person, right? If you're playing against somebody and they're at 2 life and you attack 10k into their life, they have to give you 3 2ks, or they have to block, or they have to take the life. They have to do something, right? They can't just be like, okay, I'll take the life and then whatever, right? Like once they get low enough, they're not really receptive to taking big hits like this and going down even lower, especially if it's a deck that loses to pressure. So you have to keep that in mind as well. So if you use every card in your hand to protect this Kaido when your opponent is at 3 life, you are going to lose the game. Even though he is a 9 cost 10k character that is normally very good, if you are not in the position to go for lethal, he is less valuable because what is he really doing in the grand scheme of things, right? Every card works the same way. There's a lot of game to play. And if you overcounter to protect a character that is not actually getting you to where you want to be, you are wasting cards and you will often lose because of it, right? So just to reiterate on this is, if for whatever reason they get rid of you try to protect this Kaido at 3 life, when they're at 3 life, and you go down to 0 cards in hand, for example, they don't even need to kill the Kaido at that point because the Kaido is not doing anything. Now they can just easily just kill you because they attack 5 at life, you take it. They attack 7 at life, you take it. Even if they don't kill you, they can just easily just take the hit from Kaido, or even the characters that swing or that Kaido kills, when they turn sideways, they already basically did damage or took a bunch of cards out of your hand. So now Kaido's not nearly as valuable. He's just a big beat stick that can clear one thing per turn. So, like I said, depending on the situation of the game, everything is either more or less valuable depending on, what the board state looks like. So characters can also be more valuable depending on the situation or deck that you're playing into. For example, if you're playing against Sakazuki and for a fact your opponent can't get rid of a Nell, this card is more valuable. It's like the most valuable card in the game. It's 2 cards out of their hand every turn, especially when they're lower on life. This card is just causing so many problems. It's really hard to put a value on it. But I'll just say it like this, right? Because a lot of times, if they can't kill it by battle, right? For whatever reason, whether you have blockers or an L Thor up or whatever it is, right? And obviously you have your leader effect. If you can't kill it by battle, they're going to have to use at least 3 cards to get rid of this, right? Because they're gonna like, let's say Sakazuki, for example, just to put in a vacuum, is Ice Age, Houndblaze, and something else, right? That's not only at least 3 Dawn, right? But it's 3 Dawn and also at least 3 Dawn and also 3 cards for a card that not only took 2 cards out of your hand already or a life, but also it only is really technically a -1 for you because you're trashing 1 life that you're usually just going to be able to recover with either your leader or Yamato or Katakuri or something like that. So you're basically using 1 card, which is this Enel, to get rid of 5 cards from your opponent, right? It's either a life, 2 cards in hand, and then also 3 cards to be able to kill it if they can't kill it by battle. And that's just a very valuable card for something that doesn't actually generate value. In fact, it loses value technically because it trashes a life to save itself. But if it's forcing you to use so much Dawn or cards or whatever it is, it's very valuable. And that's a card that obviously, is really good, right? And you can play it in certain situations to make it even more valuable than it normally would be. Value can also be determined based on cost of a card and the board state. So if a card can't be removed by events or characters because it is either over the threshold or it's just too big it's too big to attack into it, then saving it by battle can be worth using some cards for it. For example, right? Like against a Nell, they have like no way of killing this they literally have no way of killing this Kaido by card effect, right? At least not yet until that event releases. I don't know if it's an EBO 1 or set 6. But once I drop this Kaido, they can't kill it by card effects. So the only way for them to kill it is killing it by battle, right? And if they go 16 at it, the odds of them being able to do that again are so low. So is this card worth a 2/2Ks and a 1K? Yes, absolutely, because that's probably the only chance they're ever going to have to crack the Kaido. And the longer this card stays on the board, not only is he getting rid of basically 1 card per turn by battle, but it drew you 4 cards. Even if it didn't draw you 4 cards, it's just the ability to just have that body that they can't get off the board that deals with all of their big characters is massive, and is also a guaranteed hit every single time. So of course it's worth that much, right? But on a deck that can easily remove it, something like if you're playing like Crocodile, if they swing 16 at it, with their own Kaido and they save 6 Dawn up, they could just red rock it, right? So you're like, oh, okay, I'm not giving you 3 cards just for you to bottom deck it, right? Like I might as well just like let it go in that situation right there. Same thing with Borsalino into something like Purple Luffy. Purple Luffy literally cannot kill it with Purple Kaido because obviously it's a 7 cost and not a 6. But the only way for them to kill it is by battle. A lot of times they won't actually be able to dedicate that much Dawn to be able to, make you discard a ton of cards. So if they swing 10 at it with Kaido, and they have no other way of killing this, of course it's worth discarding a 2K and a 1K because, Kaido is going to, the only way for them to kill it is by Kaido attacking into it. And if you, play a Rebecca or a Sabo or Borsalino right after this, then there's no way they're ever going to kill it. So it's just a body that's always getting value by taking cards out of their hand or killing characters or doing life. So same thing with attack power. If a character, like I said, is naturally tall and your opponent has no answer for it, on the off chance that they do have an answer for it, you should try to save it, right? That's just a general rule right there. So if possible, try to have at least 5 cards in hand at all times. Any less, and you are just not able to save your characters in later parts of the game, and your guys will basically start to fall like dominoes, right? Even if you can save them, going down to 3 cards is usually not ideal, unless you're in one of those situations that I described earlier, right? Where, saving something could be useful depending on board state, right? This is just a general rule, right? A lot of times you'll see, that's why I think pudding is so good, right? Like the new pudding that shuffles your hand into your deck and draws 5 is because your opponent tries to generate so much value from just taking life and getting value off these characters, and if you just reset them and put them back at 5, if they I don't like countering when I have 5 cards in hand, because if I go down to less than that, it makes it a lot harder for me to protect stuff in the future, and it's just all my characters basically just start to fall, and it's just bad. So try to keep at least 5 cards in your hand more, especially if you're not playing against a deck that can hit you with Law or Pudding or Isho or something like that. Realistically, then it's always best to have as many cards in it as possible to protect your stuff. So let's sum this up. Actually, this was not as long of a video as I thought it was going to be. This is actually pretty good timing. 18 minutes, probably going to be 20 something minutes at the end of this. But let's sum this up, right? So every card you have can be valuable in its own way based on cost, power, board state, utility, whatever it is, right? Before playing or countering or not countering any card, do your best to determine if you are able to play the game in a way to get as much value from that card as possible. This could be using it to pressure, using it to create card advantage, using it to fight for board control, whatever it is, etc., right? And think to yourself, how useful is this card, or will this card be in the game you are actually playing, right? The game you are actually in. What the game presents itself to play like. If that card, and if that card is worth however, wait, what did I just type here? Hold on, let me read this real quick. And if that card is worth however many cards you would need to, okay, yeah. And if that card is worth however many cards you would need to save it. I phrased that super weird. So let me just reiterate real quick. Think to yourself what game you are actually playing, right? Because certain cards will actually be more or less valuable in certain matchups. So if you think a card is just the same value in every single situation and or matchup, then a lot of times you're going to oversave it to basically get the value that you think it's going to have, but you're not in that situation or the matchup that it's actually going to get a lot of value, you know? So, you know, before you commit cards or Dawn or whatever it is to playing this character or saving this character, think to yourself, is it worth however many cards you would need to save it, or however much Dawn you would need to play it? You know, in that, you know, certain cards may seem valuable in general, but in that specific game you are playing, they are not nearly as valuable as you are thinking, right? So cards are usually, you know, more valuable the longer the game goes on. Because they force your opponent to respond to their presence, whether it's an attack or it's cards from hand to remove them or whatever it is, you know, them playing blockers, whatever it is, they are valuable in their own right. And your whole goal is to get the value from them depending on the board state, right? So by countering with the right cards at the right times, you are able to have more cards than your opponent will every game, and it will lead to more free wins because you are just playing with more cards than your opponent has at all times, right? Think to yourself, if you started the game out with 7 cards in hand, your opponent starts out with 5 cards in hand, who is more likely to win? By playing this game correctly, you are just able to play with more cards than your opponent at the right times, and you'll win because of it. I actually gave this example to someone when I was coaching them, probably like an hour ago. But if you are in a foot race with someone and that person shoots himself in the foot, you're probably going to win the race, right? Like unless they're like on drugs or something and there's like no way to, and like they don't feel the pain. But, you know, a lot of times your opponent will mess up and give you more cards. And if you do that, or I'm sorry, if they do that, it's a lot easier for you to win the game because you'll have more cards than them. Vice versa, if you keep sacrificing cards for cards that don't actually get you as much as you might think, your opponent is going to be able to win the game much easier because you're just playing with less cards. So it's kind of like the ebb and flow, right? It's like, okay, if both of you guys play perfectly, then at that point it comes down to just luck, right? If you know, this guy had this card at this time and then they won because of it, right? But I would much rather lose to like the guy just have, or the girl, you know, I mean, there's girls that play One Piece, the person I'm playing against to have the cards that they need at the right times than me giving them cards for no reason and them winning because they played better than me, right? If you can just eliminate all of the errors from every game you play, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, guys, because I make mistakes all the time. If I stream sometimes and I won't be paying attention and I'll counter when I shouldn't have, I'll use cards on the wrong characters and whatever it is. But if I do my best with all the stuff that I know to play perfectly, I would much rather lose in that way, because my opponent has just what they need at the right times, than me giving away cards and giving away the game and my opponent outplaying me. And that to me is just a better way to play, right? And obviously you're going to win more like games, tournaments, locals, you know, treasure cup cards because of it. And I recently, starting in set 4 is when I really started for this to click, right? Like I started playing in set 1. I quit during set 2 because I didn't like Whitebeard. I came back in set 3 more so like casually. And set 4 is when I really started to actually like play competitively and understand this stuff. And since I've been doing that, I've been able to like win more treasure cup cards or do better in tournaments, case tournaments, whatever it is, because I'm starting to really understand this, you know, pretty well. And I'm hoping that, you know, you guys are able to see this, what I'm talking about as well, and then apply it to your game, and then obviously do better at tournaments, locals, whatever it is. And, you know, you'll start to, you know, win cards and just be just better at this game in general. So, yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. If you guys like this video, be sure to like it. I have a Patreon. Be sure to check out the link down below if you guys want to check out some more content and support me just in general. So I really appreciate you guys. See you later. Peace.